All right. Raja Chakravorti. I think you're a popular man in Las Vegas this time of year, but for the audience at home who doesn't know you, could you give us who are you? Who do you represent? Why are you excited to be here?
Thank you so much, Whit. I'm really happy to be here. So, Raja Chakravorti, I lead our universal access team at Plaid. Plaid's the company that has really focused on building a data infrastructure upon which fintechs are able to leverage financial connections so that they're able to build the services that they need to be able to operate the applications that they want to provide for consumers that just have great experiences. The universal access part of the business is really focused on evolving the data sources that power an open finance ecosystem. So when we think about open finance, a lot of people used to think about that originally as data flowing from financial institutions, really banks, out to fintechs to be able to use them. But what we've really started to see is this evolution in consumer behavior where consumers' financial data actually ends up sitting at a lot of different parts of the ecosystem. And so if there's a way in which we can create a way in which all of these applications are able to share their data, then that means that the consumers are actually able to have the best possible outcome.
Yeah, yeah, very nice. And you guys are stalwarts of that space, but as far as like thematically, I know Money 2020 shuffles a bit every year. So, what are your priorities this year? I guess. What are you guys here talking about primarily?
Yeah, the fintech ecosystem is one that we've seen just a tremendous evolution on. I think the way in which our business operates is we get to sit kind of at the intersection of all of the financial services companies and all the fintech applications. So we get to really bet on this idea that the entire ecosystem, when it does well, Plaid does well. And so one of the biggest things we saw over the last couple of years is that particularly with the pandemic, there's been a lot of focus on innovation within the fintech ecosystem, and we got to see consumers starting to choose fintech more and more. So it went from somewhere like 5 in 10 consumers using fintech applications a few years back to somewhere between 8 to 9 out of 10 consumers using fintech applications today. So just a dramatic growth there. Um, the fascinating thing is that over this last year, as we've started to see people kind of return to going into stores, starting to reemerge out of the pandemic, that fintech use case has actually sustained. So whereas some may have thought that there would be a big drop off, we've only seen a very small drop off. In fact, 8 out of 10 consumers are still using fintech today, which is really amazing for us. And so our focus here at Money20 is seeing, well, hey, the fintech ecosystem has evolved dramatically such that it has now become fundamental to consumers' everyday uses. And so how do we keep sustaining that, and how do we keep building towards a future that just is great for consumers as they start to have kind of an integrated approach between using their apps, going into stores, and really ensuring that they've got this whole kind of multi-dimensional use case for fintech.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know you guys obviously have a huge breadth of partners you work with, many of whom are here. But specific to Green Dot, we've shared a great relationship over the past several years. I guess as your role in financial access and Green Dot, I think we have a pretty similar shared mission. So anything you want to talk about for our partnership specifically, or goals you see for that?
Well, absolutely. So for Plaid, our fundamental mission is consumer financial empowerment. And this is where there's just so much synergy with Green Dot. Our focus is on ensuring that consumers of all types are able to use all of the financial services that they want to be able to use for their financial health. Now, one of the things that we have seen, I guess, through history is that there's a whole swath of consumers who maybe don't have access to all of the capabilities that affluent consumers have
Right.
because they may not qualify off of traditional measures for things like access to credit or access to different aspects of banking services. But this is what's been so cool about fintech is that fintech actually provides that access to consumers of all types because it creates this access point for data so that you're able to get a much more balanced view of that consumer's behavior and therefore have better curated experiences for those consumers. And so when we think about ways in which we can continue to help the ecosystem, those investments are really important. And I think one of the partnerships that we had with Green Dot and with GO2 Bank was really starting to think about, well, when a consumer thinks about what their primary financial institution is, does that need to be a bank in its traditional sense? Can it be an evolution for a financial services company that maybe addresses their needs more holistically? I think this has been one of the things that's been super exciting about the partnership is that we've developed this opportunity for the Green Dot consumer to be able to connect their accounts directly to the fintech applications they want to use. So let's say a consumer wants to be able to use a peer-to-peer payments application. Well, they no longer need to move that fund from their fintech application, or in this case, they don't need to move their money away from Green Dot to another financial institution to be able to use that solution, but instead can go directly. And that's really, really valuable for the consumer because it allows them to create a much more seamless experience. It means that there's less friction in that experience, and that creates deeper engagement within our partners. And I think, I hope this has been really beneficial as part of the Green Dot partnership.
No, absolutely. And he's not being paid to say that. All right. Well, shifting gears a tiny bit, let's zoom out a tiny bit. This is obviously a futuristic, looking ahead kind of conference. What do you see as the biggest drivers for fintech innovation in the next 5-10 years?
Yeah. There's a couple areas that I think are really exciting. One is something that has been invested on over time, but it is really just about expanding access to credit.
Yeah.
And I think this theme is one that's persisting. But as we start to see a lot of changes happen within the consumer population, demographic trends that are shifting, that maybe make things like FICO score less valuable to actually ascertain the risk of a consumer, but being able to access alternative data points having more value, that actually means that being able to provide solutions that start to take into account additional data sources becomes really exciting and compelling. A place that we've seen a lot of interest has been in and around crypto as well. And so I think everyone's been aware of the news and has been watching kind of the fluctuation that's happened in that market. People have talked about the crypto winter. But what we're also starting to see, though, as an output of that, is that there's actually an opportunity to bring crypto and Web3 payment archetypes back into the traditional ecosystem, such that it can sit alongside ways in which people traditionally use their money. So imagine having access to a personal financial management tool that's able to measure a consumer's financial health and help them with their budgeting, and also understand, hey, here's what my investment portfolio looks like. But being able to actually bring a crypto asset portfolio into that so it sits alongside. So a consumer is now able to better understand their financial health across a myriad of different asset types, which means that they now have more choices. And by the way, when we tie that back into opportunities and credit, now all of a sudden you can actually loop that into creating a financial health profile that just becomes much more robust. And I think those types of innovations are things that are going to be really fascinating over the next few years.
Very nice. Very nice. So I guess, on a personal level from your experience, like what would you say is some of the strongest financial advice you've ever received, and why? How do you put that to use?
Uh, yeah, I think that's a great question. I'm still in the market for more financial advice, by the way.
Like we all are.
Yeah, I think a key to this for me is around long-term planning, and ensuring that as you start thinking about a healthy financial portfolio, what do those investments that are focused on defining future wealth look like? I think it's sometimes hard for people, millennials, people who are maybe in my age. I guess I'm older than a millennial, but maybe a step down. Talking about 401ks becomes complicated. There's a lot of things in there that have a lot of jargony terms that makes it a little hard for people to think about what does that look like over time. I think we've lived in this world where there's a lot of a here and now opportunity set, and it's like, hey, I want to make an investment, I want to see return immediately, rather than focusing on that long term. But focusing on that, I think, has been really it has been really important for me, and that was a really important piece of financial advice for me.
Absolutely. Cool. And as far as our space and the group of people we have here, in Las Vegas this week, what do you think is most misunderstood about where fintech is today, and some of the conversations we've been hearing on site?
Yeah. So as when I think about fintech, the evolution, all of the new applications that are there. I think there's so much opportunity, but as consumers start to choose those opportunities, there has to be a very implicit focus on consumer privacy, trust, safety, and ultimately control. Plaid actually just over the past week released a product called Permissions Manager, which actually helps organizations be able to empower their consumers to be able to manage where they've connected their data. And we found this to be a really important evolution because while a lot of institutions are always focused on, hey, what's the new thing that I can do? Ensuring that consumers feel like they have control as they start exposing that data so they get access to those new innovations is really fundamentally important. And so this focus around kind of that consumer privacy, trust, and control aspect, I think, is an area that really needs to have a lot of focus. And it's certainly an area that we're invested in to ensure that, that we're building for the best possible outcomes.
Yeah, that's smart. Yeah. All right, just we'll end with a couple rapid fire ones, or relatively rapid fire. But how many financial apps do you use on a weekly basis?
Oh, well, I'm a bit of a fintech nerd because I happen to work with a bunch of them. So probably like 6 to 7.
Okay.
I used, I think, three different peer-to-peer payment apps this week already. So, it might be a little higher by the end of this conference.
Yeah, especially after expense reports.
Yes.
What area or feature do you see getting most regulation attention the next year?
So Dodd-Frank 1033, and this sits right at the intersection of where Plaid sits, is Dodd-Frank 1033 is a provision within the Dodd-Frank ruling which is oriented around consumer ownership of their own financial data. What's been really interesting is that has really defined the open finance ecosystem.
Yeah.
But in the U.S., there hasn't actually been a law that has been passed to define what that looks like. But I do expect that to occur over the next year. I think there's been a lot of leading indicators that will happen. The CFPB has been empowered to develop a rule. But what's been really interesting about what's been happening in the U.S. is we've actually allowed the market to define what the open finance choices are, which I think actually provides for much better consumer outcomes. But I think we're starting to get to that point where we're going to hear, okay, well, what does it look like? What do banks need to ensure they're providing? What does a multi-dimensional ecosystem look like? And how do we ensure that we're protecting consumer privacy? So I guess it's a little bit of a cheat, but I will go back to that as being the thing that I anticipate the most as a regulatory change coming up next year.
All right. So what company do you think is in the best position to launch a financial super app?
Well, that's a big question. So when I think about a financial super app that would be really effective, it's one that likely has a multi-pronged solution that is embedded where consumers actually transact, that has both consumer, merchant, business sort of feels to it, and that has scale. And so, I guess as a qualifier, I'm an ex-PayPal alumni. And I know there's been sort of different plans that they've talked about, but that's the type of institution that I think is able to launch one because you're actually touching on consumer use cases, you're touching on merchant payment processing, you're touching on credit, but you're also focusing on where the consumer themselves are actually transacting, which I think is a really important aspect, and it's an area that should have a lot of legs as we start moving into this next iteration of fintech.
Awesome. Well, Raj, I can't thank you enough for taking some time out of your busy schedule and join us in here. So thank you very much.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you.